Good afternoon and welcome to another webinar from ERA, the European Union Agency for Railways. My name is Max Obenhaus and I will guide you through this afternoon's program. We are honored today to welcome two great guest speakers. One is Kate Westliepe, Advisor Multimodality in EU Affairs at North Sea Port. North Sea Port is a conglomerate of several ports along the Dutch and Belgian North Sea coast, and green and efficient transport is very important to them. Our second speaker today is Ralf Charlie Schulze, President of the UIRR, the International Union of Combined Road Rail Transport. He is a strong and relentless advocate for making the much-used buzzword of multimodality a reality in the EU. Today we will look at the role that rail freight may play for achieving climate goals and different measures that would support an improved and better managed infrastructure. After an introduction by our Executive Director, Joseph Doppelbauer, and a presentation by my colleagues Sarah Bisotto and Idris Pargon, we will kick off a discussion with Kate and Ralf Charlie on the multimodal dimension, and then open up the floor to questions from you, our audience. You can ask questions to panelists using the chat function, which you will find at the top right corner of your screen, or you vote for questions that you like, posted by other attendees by clicking the thumbs up icon on those questions. This webinar is recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and our website hereafter. But before I give the floor to our Executive Director, I would like to invite you all to take part in a simple poll question that we prepared for you. And if this question could be posted to the chat now, please. The question is, which are the main elements of the mobility and transport of tomorrow? And you can just think about the question while you watch the presentation and the discussion going. And by the end of this webinar, we will provide you the answers, the result of the poll. You are allowed to make a choice of 3 out of 7 possible answers. And with this, I would like to hand over to Joseph Doppelbauer, our Executive Director. Joseph.
Many thanks, Max. Also from my side, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. During the COVID pandemic, the reduction in rail passenger transport volume has been up to 90%, whereas on the other hand, rail freight in Europe has only decreased by around 12 to 13% in 2020. However, transport will remain important. Think only of the necessary supply with essential goods. A very important other crisis has just been hidden behind COVID from public attention, the climate crisis. Today, we will make reference to the Commission's Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, which was published in December last year. And this strategy sets very clear targets for rail freight to increase by 50% by 2030 and to double by 2050. But despite considerable public and private investment in both infrastructure and rolling stock, we have observed a stagnated modal share of only 17 to 18% for rail freight during the last 2 decades. With road being around 75%, the balance is with inland waterways. So, what is required to finally boost the modal shift for rail freight? There is a massive potential for the rail freight to play a key role for achieving the climate goals. I'm convinced that massive improvements can be achieved with a combination of push and of pull measures, and of course the necessary political will to change the political framework, such as improved regulation, fair taxation, CO2 pricing, etc. In order to fight the climate change, we need to act early. Rail resolutions are ready to be deployed, and in this webinar we will specifically discuss the potential that we have with combined transport. In our webinar today, we'll explain how rail freight can help to meet the climate goals. We will explain how the high transport capacity at low footprint, both in regard to physical space and the carbon footprint. One freight train of 740 meters can replace 50 trucks, meaning we need to develop a green logistic chain in Europe with rail as its backbone. I will now give the floor to our presenters today, Sarah Bizzotto and Idris Bagan, and in their presentation they will give you the full background. Sarah and Idris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doppelbauer, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are all well and ready to start this webinar. I would like to begin today by reminding you some 3 important EU objectives for 2030. We have a 40% cut of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels, which may become even 55% as agreed in April 2021. The improvement in energy efficiency by 32.5% and the increase of the share in renewable energies reaching a 32%. The ultimate ambition is to reach a carbon neutral economy in the European Union by 2050. But what does this mean for the transport sector? The European Commission issued a communication in December 2019 containing a global roadmap, the so-called European Green Deal, setting some ambitious targets for the transport sector. A 90% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and a shift of a significant part of inland freight carried today by road to rail and inland waterways. In addition to this, the European Commission published in December last year a strategy for smart and sustainable mobility, with a clear intention to double rail freight, to triple high-speed rail passengers transport by 2050, and to shift collective transport on distances up to 500 kilometers to carbon-neutral transport modes by 2030. The European Commission will also promote some initiatives to increase and better manage the capacity of railways and inland waterways from this year on. We all know that the transport sector is one of the biggest challenges ahead to decarbonize our economy. And we also know that it has been significantly hit by the COVID-19 crisis, as we can see in the red part of this graph. We will need the same 6% annual decrease of greenhouse gas emissions as in 2020 to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees over the next decades. Over the last year, we saw an increase in the volume of freight transported by rail, a reduction of its emissions and its energy consumption, but its market share has not really improved. Indeed, with an average growth of 4.1% between 2015 and 2018, the sector has seen its modal share decreasing from 18.8% to 18.7%. So, after this general overview, Idris and I would like now to present our report that we will publish today on the ERA website as our contribution to the future initiatives of the European Commission. As you can see in this slide, we individuated 6 clusters of measures to promote rail freight and which could support the achievement of higher objectives. First, we have a level playing field for all transport modes, a modernization of the railway sector through technological development, a real multimodal strategy, an easy access to the rail offer, a focus on the customer's needs, and finally, building leadership and monitoring the results. I will now give the floor to Idris, who will explain us some of these measures.
So thank you, Sarah. No, I will start with the level playing field for all transport modes. Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute myself. So as we all know, in the freight transportation, the main competitor to the rail is the road sector. In this competition, rail has a serious disadvantage compared to the road, since the rail sector covers for the major part of the external costs it causes. This is considerably less the case for the road sector. The issue of road pricing is known for long now and was already mentioned in the Wide Transport paper from 2011. After more than 10 years, it is time now to fully adopt the polluter pays and user pays principles. This is the only way to ensure a fair competition between modes of transport while internalizing the external costs. The current developments on the Eurovignette directive, which already introduced some road pricing mechanism, are crucial for the rail sector. The other important aspect is to direct the investments where they are needed. We need a European mindset for rail with strategic EU priorities for funding projects. There is also a need to incentivize, for instance, the investments in private railway sidings close to industrial sites. Our report contains some interesting examples of this kind of investments in private railway sidings, like the case of the WIT train of Barilla Group that made it possible to shift a large part of their freight from road to rail. This demonstrates that such investments in railway infrastructure can make the difference. The railway has also to modernize, as it was stated in the introduction. And for the agency, we see three key technological developments which are paving the way to the digitalization of the railways. An acceleration in the deployment of ERTMS, this advanced European train control and signaling system, is key to digitalize the railway sector and can increase rail capacity by 30 to 40%, but it still suffers some delay in its implementation. ERTMS is also very important to launch automatic train operation, with already some positive experience in some European shunting yards. And last but not least, the digital automatic coupling is extremely important for freight, as it will increase productivity by eliminating the manual coupling process and allow to automatize some train operations. ERA, together with Shift to Rail, is working hard to make this happen in the next years. Rail is clearly the most competitive mode of transport on dense routes, but it is also clear that the modal shift will not be the result of rail completely substituting other transport modes. On the contrary, goods and passengers will shift to railway as it is better integrated in the wider transport and mobility system. We were talking about competition with rail, but it's also about cooperation. If we seriously want to increase the share of the rail freight transport, we need to develop a green logistic chain where the synergies between modes of transport are optimized. Firstly, we need to favor intermodal and combined transport as far as possible. Today, more than 50% of rail ton kilometer can be attributed to combined transport. To make sure that this growth is sustainable, there is a need to make a large analysis at EU level of the demand for terminal capacities on all freight corridors and in and around the ports. Indeed, the transport of standardized maritime containers represent today 62% of the market of combined transport, which also indicates a growing trend to ensure a strong cooperation with the maritime sector. Indeed, with 74% of goods exported from or to the EU transiting by a European port, it is essential for the rail sector to ensure a good cooperation with the maritime world. There is a need to develop initiatives to improve the synergy between maritime, inland waterways, and railway and the railway world, elaborated at EU level, with the idea to define the key features to develop optimized port rail ecosystem. This could eventually result in the creation of a multimodal or land transport agency with the aim to ensure this optimization between modes of transport. But customers do not always choose rail because sometimes they don't even know where to knock. there are many marketplaces existing on the market on the market for road services providers, but rail is barely integrated in those offers. It would be essential to ensure visibility and transparency of the rail offer as an alternative to be present on marketplaces. To facilitate the access to the rail offer, we also need to identify the missing links on the network. In 2018, a large study has been performed to identify those missing links, but it was focused on passenger services. We need a dedicated study providing an overview on the bottlenecks for the rail freight sector, because currently we only have some partial analysis at corridor level. This will help to direct the necessary investments on the infrastructure to eventually improve freight capacity. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Idris. I will now focus on two last important measures, namely the customers at central focus and the leadership with a global vision of the logistic chain's impact. Railway stakeholders need to be more customer-oriented. This is a criticism that is often heard, since currently to operate a train from, let's say, Port du Havre until Warsaw, you have at best to contact 3 organizations: French, German, and Polish. We believe that the best option to ensure an end-to-end path allocation process is to devolve it to a centralized organization. The railway is still predominantly national-oriented, while the freight market is now Europeanized. This would foster the development of this European mindset that is currently quite lacking. A Eurocontrol for rail would facilitate cross-border path allocation and eventually also decrease rail freight costs. In this slide, you can see 2 additional sub-measures, namely Europeanizing the concept of regular timetables and revitalizing the European single wagon load, that I invite you to discover in our report. Finally, in order to follow up the achievement of the objectives I was mentioning at the beginning, a multimodal monitoring committee at executive level could be set up with a task to elaborate a concrete roadmap to increase rail freight volumes and to monitor the achievement of the objectives. As for the last point, there is already some mechanism to monitor the decarbonization of the economy, including the transport sector with the monitoring mechanism regulation. In this case, the European Environmental Agency compiles the information and would need to know the greenhouse gas emission intensity in order to actually have this electricity used by the railway undertakings. An EU environment labeling for transport, allowing for intermodal comparison, would be extremely useful to have customers making their choice. For example, EASA has started to work on this for the aviation sector. And I would like to stress that it is key to adopt a multimodal approach to this labeling system. So, to conclude, rail is by far the most energy efficient mode of transport, but the different transport modes must be highly integrated to find the optimum transport mix. The railway sector has an essential role to play in a greener multimodal logistic chain. And I would like now to conclude with a sentence from Angela Merkel that says, "Only with rail we will achieve our climate goals, and we want more goods transported by rail." I will now give the floor back to Max. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Idris and Joseph for your interesting thoughts. Let us bring in our first panelist who, despite a technical check beforehand, was not able to join us today with video. but he's the president of the UIRR, Ralf Charlie Schulze. And please introduce yourself quickly. And it would be interesting to know your vision on how combined transport can help achieving the Green Deal objectives. I think we will come back to him later. And then let's switch to our other guest speaker. It's Kate Versleepe, advisor for multimodality and EU affairs at North Sea Port. Please also introduce yourself, and we are interested in particularly one question. What is the modal share of rail freight traffic from and to North Sea Port? And do you have any plan to increase this modal share in the future? Thank you, Kate. Please take the floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting North Sea Port to this interesting seminar or webinar. So at first, I'm working for North Sea Port in the commercial department, and as you said, I'm as an advisor for multimodality and rail and European aspects to that. And North Sea Port, in fact, it is important for me that I can tell about this. We are the merged port of the ports of Ghent in Belgium and Terneuzen and Vlissingen in the Netherlands. So we are a cross-border port since 1st of January 2018. And in the ranking of goods traffic, since the merger, we are now the 9th port in Europe for maritime traffic and the 3rd port concerning added value, which means that we now are working on a higher scale, let's say. It concerns the modal shift. The modal share of rail freight in our port was in 2019 was 10%. So 10% of all goods that go to and from the hinterland are transported by rail. Your further question was, I guess, how to, I will let you say.
Well, we would like to hear if you have any plans to increase that share in the future, and if not, what could be the difficulties you encounter when doing that, and are there any reasons why you would like to use railways more, and are there any reasons why you cannot? That would be interesting from your perspective.
Yeah. So our perspective, our goal is to grow with rail from 10 to 15% by 2026. And for that, we have a rail strategy which is focusing on 3 levels. And the first level is infrastructure. And infrastructure in the port and outside the port. In the port, there is the need for more capacity. We have a rail net, let's say, in the port, but due to the merger, we are now working together with Terneuzen and Vlissingen, and the net is not extended on the cross-border, let's say. So on the right side of our port, there is a missing link of 7 kilometers rail, and that is one of our big infrastructure projects we want to do. Next to that, we are also focusing on more capacity in the bundles, and of course we are focusing also on intermodal, because this is the largest growth sector at this moment in the port. We have now 3 intermodal terminals who have rail connection and short sea and inland navigation liner services, so we need to interconnect them very good between the modes. Then also infrastructure outside the port. Well, this is also large trains need to have bypass possibilities and so on. So what is the difficulty with infrastructure? That is that it's a long process and the budget of the infrastructure managers is restricted, and I understand, and I'm sure that they need to take smart choices. They cannot do everything. And the second thing in our rail strategy is about making the rail offer competitive. We are putting North Seaport on the rail freight corridors map. We want to represent the interests of the terminals and the shippers with the infrastructure managers and the railway undertakings. We want to focus as a port authority a lot on rail, and therefore we need to understand the rail sector. But what is really difficulty is that the operational issues that are a consequence of sometimes lack in infrastructure or of good infrastructure. And by this I mean, for example, when you have your bundles are not signaled, then different rail operators should work very well together in those bundles, and that is not always so easy. Yeah, the third aspect in our rail strategy is to have to develop new rail products, and it's important intermodal here. Yeah, that was my.
It's very interesting because, well, first of all, as an international operator that you are, having 2 EU nations under your umbrella, you face a similar problem that we face at the era when we want to go by train, by passenger train to Brussels. We are missing a few kilometers to go to Mons and then have a direct train to Brussels. But thank you for these very interesting aspects that both you as a port and your customers are willing to and wish to use railways more and maybe have some difficulties and putting that into action. Because I just saw that our second co-panelist just rejoined us again, and I hope he's now here. Ralph Charlie, can you hear me? And more to the point, can we hear you now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, very well, Charlie.